Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so very much for joining us today. My name is Henry Overton. I'm president and one of the co-founders of Turnkey Solutions. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get this webinar off to a great start. Okay, can you see my screen? Am I sharing it yet?
Yes.
Not yet.
Yes.
Yay, all right, cool. That's always the other thing that's like about a 50-50 chance if I do it right. All right, well, thank you all again for joining us. We're very excited to have you here today. And our subject is preventing cyber incidents, and we're going to hit it from a really cool and different angle. We pound out a lot of technical jargon in my industry, and when you watch webinars where it's just me and some of my team, we talk a lot of things like just this specific tech or this or antivirus or whatever, and we're going to hit it from a completely different perspective. If you're new to us, and you're not sure exactly what we do, Turnkey Solutions has been in business since 1999. We've got clients across the U.S. We support companies in a whole bunch of different industries, but we really focus on companies that are basically compliance or cybersecurity focused and really IT dependent. And it's not that we don't take care of a lot of great companies that maybe have lesser concerns in that realm, but it's become a specialty of ours over the last few decades, and we've really spent a lot of time focusing on that. We've got a lot of good reviews and internally and externally, and we're excited about that. But it all comes from kind of doing a lot of things for our clients, like managed services to voice over IP and compliance services and all that. But one of the things that we get asked a lot about is legal advice, and that's just not in my slide deck. We don't do that. And that's why we're so really very glad to introduce you to somebody that we met a few years back and just have really enjoyed working with, and that's Sarah Anderson. So I'm going to stop in just a second. Let me introduce you to Sarah. She is Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Army, former. She's served as the Chief Legal Counsel for the state of Louisiana's cyber response team. She founded SWA Law Firm. You can look them up at legallycyber.com. And this is a mouthful, but she does all the things that like we can't do, and it's just not in our wheelhouse, or certainly in our education and certifications. She represents public and private entities on cyber incident response, regulatory compliance, implementation of enhanced cybersecurity practices, artificial intelligence integration, contract negotiations involving technology products and services. She does a ton of stuff in this space, and really, if you get to know her a little bit, you'll find that she can talk the technology lingo as well as any technician you will ever run across. So it's really we're excited to bring her because she's going to bridge the gap into what a business owner or leader needs to know. Recent presenter at the RSA conference. Sarah, I can go on and on and on. Your page on your website of your certifications and experience in your bio is like you have to scroll a lot to get through it. So we're just honored to have you. We really are, and we're so very excited. Do you want to take it over from here?
Yes. I think we're good talking about me if you want to get to the subject matter.
Yeah. Go ahead, and you can take over the screen share, and
Great.
we'll get rolling.
All right. So as stated, my name is Sarah Anderson, and today we're going to talk about preventing cyber incidents from a non-technical perspective, because although most people may not realize it, it's actually almost as effective as using technological tools to prevent cyber incidents from the administrative side than just focusing strictly on the tech, because people tend to be the greatest weakness as well as the greatest asset simultaneously. It all comes back to Chinese proverbs of, quick yin and yang. So I want to start today with talking about a theme for today and tell you that anytime you see Moira from Schitt's Creek, it's a time when I want you to be paying particular attention, because I don't know if you've ever seen the show, but Schitt's Creek is family friendly. I strongly recommend it. It was hysterical. It's available on Hulu. But Moira is this larger than life character. She actually used to be the mom in Home Alone. And her position on everything is absolutely absurd, with the exception of the things she actually says, which tend to be extremely poignant. So I thought she'd be great for, sort of a bizarre topic like cybersecurity. So my theme today is cybersecurity is an absolute mess. It is. There's nothing you can do to prevent attacks completely. No vendor should ever say they're 100% able to prevent your, incidents. There's always going to be something that goes wrong. So you simply have to do your best, and that is the truth. And when I say do your best, that means take the position where you eat the elephant one bite at a time, meaning you do the things that are within your power, to do one little bit at a time. And then my question to you is, at the end, what's your excuse? If everything is just based on your ability, your budget, your know-how, at the end of the day, if you're doing your best, there's no excuse not to do it. So I want to start with some common misconceptions, because unfortunately I see these all the time, and from a practitioner standpoint, they're incredibly aggravating. So one of the first ones I see is, my organization is so small, no one would target us. This is wildly incorrect. In fact, they will target you because you are small, because you make it easy, and they will test new programs on you. The next one that I often see is, we don't have any valuable intellectual property in our system, so no one cares about us. It's not always about what you have. Sometimes it's about who trusts you. And we will get into that more a little bit later. We're entirely cloud-based, and the application encrypts our data in the cloud. So being cloud-based is great. I'm cloud-based personally. I recommend people to be cloud-based unless it's just financially not possible because you're just so large. But I don't want people to rely falsely on the encryption, because just because you have your data encrypted in the cloud, if someone gets your access credentials, all that encryption just melts away, which is why you can see your own data when you're logged in. So that, unless you've got a secondary level of encryption working on your files locally, it doesn't mean anything. Next, we have backups and insurance. That is probably the dumbest thing I hear, because it's like saying, well, I don't care. I'll change the tire going 90 miles an hour down the road. Well, one, it's impossible. Two, you will die. So it's the same concept. You put those two things together. So that's just bad news. And also, so often I see insurance policies that are just complete waste of money, and it makes me irate. Like, if you are asking an insurance company to sell you a pile of crap, they will do it happily. And if it didn't happen, if it did happen, meaning a cyber attack, we just wouldn't tell anyone. It's super obvious when it happens. It's very hard to get away with not telling anybody. And if anyone knows what they're doing, we're going to find out about it anyways. So first correction, bad actors will target you because you're small, because it's easy. They assume that you won't have much of a budget for cybersecurity tools, and software and the appropriate hardware is extremely expensive. So again, they'll target you because they're like, oh, well, they're small. They're probably not investing in this. So this will make it easy. And so you just make yourself more attractive. Remember, hacking is a low quality, high volume business. They're just looking to move as quickly as possible, right? So if you're small, you make it even easier for them. The next one is, we don't have any valuable intellectual property. They don't care necessarily about IP. Now, look, if they're going after a national law firm or a Fortune 100, then yes, they're looking for IP. But generally, most hackers are just looking for a quick buck. And so they want to just see who they can nab, and then they'll sell you to the next broker. It's kind of a little bit like human trafficking. Like, who can you capture, and then who can you sell them to? It's really sad. And then also, they want to see what kind of value they can extract, whether it's who uses you, right? So in other words, are you a trustworthy entity for someone bigger, and they just use you to get to the bigger fish, right? Or do you have something that they can potentially exploit, even if it's just common passwords and access credentials in your organization, right? That then they use to study the average person's password. I'll give you an example. I'm a very basic white suburban mom. It doesn't get more basic than me, right? So they know that my password, most likely, if I wasn't in cybersecurity, is going to have some combination of my address, my anniversary, or my children's birthdays, right? Or my children's names or my pet names. And in some cases, they would be correct. So they're also studying our habits so they can guess our passwords. The next one is, the bad actor finds the correct credentials for the application. Like I said, all encryption melts away. So unless you're using a secondary encryption mechanism, that encryption doesn't matter. In other words, that PDF is locked with a password. That can be an example, or you can run a separate software system to encrypt your documents. That is a really hard thing to do, by the way. I personally do that, and I will say it's such a pain in the butt, but I sleep better knowing that if someone got into my files, they're not going to get anything. They got to get through a second layer of encryption. And the last one, if we have backups and insurance, we're not too concerned about it. That, like I said, I've seen insurance policies that just cover privacy notifications and nothing to do with the system, or they don't cover, third party benefits. In other words, it doesn't matter if, they get sued, they won't have coverage for that. So it's all based on your policy. And then again, do you really want to be down and have that business loss and that damage to your reputation, which even if your insurance company covers you for business interruption, you still have that loss of goodwill, which is rarely covered in the policies. And you can be sued, which is just something to keep you up at night. And then this one, if this happens, I just wouldn't tell anybody. I hate to break it to you, but there are multiple websites that are just brag websites that you don't need to be on the dark web or the Onion or a Tor browser to access, that will allow you to see exactly who has been like hacked and when it happens and which group did it. And they're searchable. I mean, it is very basic. So this is an example of one of them. I was looking for a particular organization to see if they had announced the hack yet, because I knew it was coming, but I wasn't sure if it had been announced. And I was able to Google it, and I was able to pull up this. This is from telemetry.ransomwatch.ltd. There's also ransomwatch.live, which is another site. Don't go to those though, unless you're on a virtual browser. All right. So part of the reason, like I said, it happens, cyber attacks happen, even if you're small, even if you don't have intellectual property, is they've got different motivations. Sometimes it's just you make it easy. And then also times it's just financial motivations, whether it's insider trading, they want to cause a stink, they want to ransom you, or they want to extort you. Maybe your CFO is looking at porn on company time, and so they target him specifically so that they can threaten to reveal him and embarrass him in hopes that he'll pay some hush money payment. Another big one is zero trust. What that means is somebody trusts you, and so they want to use the trust that has been gifted to you to access a bigger fish. I'm going to give you a prime example. In 2013, Target got hacked a lot. This is one of the first major hacks that kind of brought a spotlight on this phenomenon that we now know happens constantly, right? And they got hacked through their HVAC system, which most people don't know. So what Target decided to do is they installed a smart HVAC system with a particular vendor, and so that they control all the temperatures in all the stores across the country. Because as any parent knows, your kid will say, oh, it's too hot up here, it's too cold in here, and they will drop the temperature all the way down or all the way up, thinking it'll like get up to a more comfortable climate faster. And of course that never works. All it does is increase the bill, because what do you do after you do it? You forget about it, and then you wake up and it's 62 degrees in your house. So this is what Target tried to do. Well, the HVAC system got hacked, and because the HVAC system, the smart system, was trusted by Target, that is how the bad guys got to Target. It's just a concept of escalation of trust, where people use a small fish to get to the bigger fish. Also, I wanted to point out with ease, especially if you're small, I was at a seminar recently where they said that 650%, small businesses were seeing a rise in cyber attacks up to 650% per quarter. In other words, 6.5 times the normal amount it's going up each quarter, which is just obscene. That's an exponential increase. And then a lot of times, if you are in any business involving children, this is easy money for the attackers. One, because you might be regulated, especially if you're covered under the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act or your school, right? So they know that, the possibility of sanctions and fines is great, but also because they have fresh batches of unscathed credit reports. In other words, a 6-year-old doesn't have a bad credit history, right? Unless they had pretty bad parents. So what these attackers will do is they will steal the identities of these children and then go ahead and ruin their credit for them before the child gets a chance to do that himself when they go to college and get the first credit card that they never pay the full balance on. So the hackers are willing to take that off your plate. And most people don't monitor their kids' credit, and they don't freeze it. Lesson here, you can actually freeze your children's credit. You submit an affidavit along with the birth certificate, along with the picture ID to the credit monitoring agencies, and they will freeze your kids' credit. So just something to think about, and it's completely free. But these are, the motivations. I will say hacktivism is, there. So is political motivation, terrorism, but I would say the biggest one is just financial motivation and ease. All right. So what can you do to protect yourself against these motivations and these individuals? Well, I don't know if you're Catholic and you're very familiar with trinities or not, but there's sort of like a trinity of cyber risk mitigation. There's physical security, administrative security, and technical security. Physical security is making sure that access to a building or place is like, there's a barrier to it. Now, there's locked doors, cameras, badges, you got to buzz in, you need to know the access code, you've got a key, right? That's a physical security measure, which is part of cybersecurity. Because if I can just walk in anywhere and I have access to a data center, which houses, sometimes hundreds of company and public infrastructure data, I could just turn off the air conditioning, right? And cause the entire thing to come crashing down and melt the system, right? So that's why physical security is important. Another one is technical security. This is where your turnkey comes in, right? And they are going to be responsible for making sure that you have a firewall, endpoint detection and response software. They're monitoring your network, right? And then you've got the admin security that we are going to be talking about today. This is the stuff you do on paper, whether you do it internally, you do it with an attorney, or you do it with your internal compliance counsel, however you're comfortable. That is that next level, right, that we are going to discuss today. So there's a bunch of different administrative policies, that I think every company has to have, that's big enough where, it's essentially you can't just look through a door and figure out, what's going on. In other words, like my company is really teeny tiny, right? That doesn't mean I'm not susceptible. All right, we do have an information security policy at my firm, but like I don't need a termination procedure because I know that if I'm the only one doing the terminating, I just walk down to my assistant's office and I go, hey, he or she is terminated, please collect their device and hand it back to me. And I'll go ahead and get into Microsoft and cut off their access, right? So there's examples, but a few I want to focus in on today. The first one is the security awareness training policy that we're going to talk about. Network security / acceptable use policy. In other words, what's acceptable for your employees to do on the machines you provide them. And third-party risk management, which is possibly the most important. So the three goals of administrative policies, like I said, with employees being your greatest resource and also your greatest security violation, is to stop employees from doing illegal or incredibly stupid things and creating existing vulnerabilities, right? Unfortunately, stupidity, or fortunately, stupidity is not yet illegal. If it were, I think my life would be easier in some ways, but then I'd also probably be in jail. And then the next one is to alert you to the employee errors as soon as possible, or to let you know of malicious actions and deter them, as well as adhere to regulated data requirements. At the bottom of the screen, you see a little news bite from the Eastern District of New York, which is one of the leading, DOJ offices in the country. And basically what happened here is this woman was fired from a part-time position. And as a result, she got pissed at the company. She went in and leaked a huge amount of their data because no one cut off her access to the system, right? And so she was what's called an insider threat. But this is important because this is what happens with angry employees. They will sell their access credentials on the dark web, right? They will go ahead and steal information, steal clients, and violate any type of non-solicitation, non-competition agreement they may have, which ultimately will cost you money, even if that entity or that individual does end up going to prison. So I kind of point this out to show you that these things can happen, especially if it's an employee that is fired that has any kind of dirt on any of the leadership of the company. They tend to be the most dangerous. Whoop. All right, so the first one I really want to harp on is doing some sort of security awareness training with your employees. I cannot verify this enough because with large language models and machine learning, I would say language barrier often associated with hacker groups that are, OCONUS or abroad, that language barrier is kind of being removed, right? They can input in Russian into ChatGPT and have it spit out something in English. That doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but it's going to be a lot more difficult to spot, right? And social engineering or phishing or whatever is very much on the rise again. It's happening in different facets, sometimes through phone calls, which large language models will disguise the accent. And then it also happens via emails, and it's really quite clever. Now, I did not make this little graphic I'm going to that you see right here. I stole this from the internet, but I could not imagine finding something more poignant. And I want to say a lot of these courses are available for free already. If you have, well, not free because you're paying for it, but you are probably paying for it without realizing it. With any enterprise level agreements with Microsoft or any other large hosting platforms, they probably have these courses available and can provide them to you for free. And I will say it's so important. One of the things, like I said, is to watch is to watch for the language barrier, which I said is harder to kind of spot, but it's still there. So one of the things I've noticed with language barriers when I see phishing is they will not understand like US punctuation. So you're going to see some weird punctuation or punctuation errors. And when I say that, I mean like you have a period and then the first letter of the first word is not capitalized after that. So the sentence may make sense, but the punctuation is off. Another one that you will see is inappropriate use of commas, or if you see a question mark and then a period, that's what I see very commonly in any type of fish, like when I catch a fishing expedition, I'll see that. And then if you notice that you get an email from someone that's usually .com and it's .net or .ai or .today, those usually signify like a new recently created domain, which are often used for phishing scams, because what your anti-malware spam will do is look for newly created domains and try and block them. So what they might do is hold on to it for at least 30 days, get past that first 30-day hump, and then start using that domain until it gets people catch on that, hey, that's a bad domain, and it starts getting blocked by common platforms. So take a look at this. I think this is so clever. So if you notice, the first bubble you see at the top underneath the word fake is a lowercase r and a lowercase n, which looks exactly like a lowercase m. So when I say this is getting clever, this is getting really clever, meaning all the more reason to start doing more employee phishing training so they can spot these emails, because a lot of the time these get sent to your accounts payable department and they start paying bills in response to, bogus invoices. You will see examples of some of the punctuation I talked about, right? And then one thing I wanted to put in here, if you ever see the word urgent, imminent, now, anything that's like kind of bluntly like hurry up and react, that is almost always a sign of phishing, because they are looking to trigger that knee-jerk reptilian reaction and try to get you to act without slowing down and thinking about the process. Like, this bill is past due. If you do not pay this immediately, we're going to cut off service and you're not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Well, think about it like this. What real partner, business partner, would treat you like that if they have any interest in continuing the relationship, especially if you've been a great bill payer from there on out? They're not going to send you an angry message like that. And if they do, it's either phishing or they're jerks and you don't want to do business with them anyways. So if you ever see language like that, I really encourage you to take a look at it. All right, here's Moira. So one of the things that I almost always never see in employment agreements that need to be in employment agreements or employee handbooks or whatever it is are acceptable use, little mini policies or provisions in those agreements that tell the employees what they can and cannot do with company equipment, right? First thing is, I always try to tell people there is no expectation of privacy. Just assume that I can see everything that you do on your machine, right? So that if you do want to implement, boss spyware, bossware, whatever it's called, you can, and you can do it legally by letting the employee know if they choose to continue on with working for you. You've let them know, hey, this is what I'm doing. They signed something saying they consent to, this use. And this way, if you need to, you can go see what went wrong in the event there is a cyber incident and you have to conduct a forensic investigation. You also need to tell them how to report abnormalities and what to do. I'll give you an example. If an employee notices that there are signs of a cyber incident, in other words, their cursor is moving or they get an encryption scene, you do not want them turning off the machine. Now, 99% of the time, people turn off the machine and think that's the safe thing to do. And while I certainly appreciate, the urge to take corrective action almost immediately, that is the wrong thing to do. The safe thing to do is to turn off the internet. In other words, shut down your internet, or almost immediately unplug it from the Ethernet cable, however you're going about your business. First thing is shut down the internet, but leave the computer on, because the computer, when it's on, will continue to store logs of activity within the memory of the computer that law enforcement or digital forensics will need to determine what happened, the scope of the incident, and how they performed the incident, so that they know how to properly remediate the system. So that is so important. You also want to do basic things like don't, use your private email for, company work, and don't use your company email for private work, because you don't want to be, held responsible as an organization for something your employee puts in there. And then you obviously want to tell them, and I never thought you would have to tell an employee, don't look at porn, be on dating sites, and gamble on company time. But as I've seen too frequently, they don't always do that. I once had someone that we were having to work with. He was very embarrassed about an event and refused to work with law enforcement because he didn't want everyone to find out that he was sending and receiving invitations to orgies through his company email. And unfortunately, he worked for a public institution. So things that you want to go ahead and instruct your employees about almost immediately. And the nice thing is if you catch them doing this and it was part of their employee, requirements or employment agreement, it gives you grounds to fire them. All right. This one is the most important. Like I said, third-party risk management means that you have a partner that you're doing business with, similar to the HVAC Target issue. And you have to understand that if you're going to enter into any type of partnership that allows digital access by and between the third party's network and your network, any vulnerability that third party has becomes your vulnerability. So it's very scary, and you have to pick your partners wisely. So first, I want to give you an example. You may or may not remember, but in June 2023, there was a big breach of the Move It platform that was used by the Louisiana Office of Motor Vehicles, as well as British Airways, AT&T, Verizon, the Oregon Department of Transportation, University of Georgia, my alma mater, and others because they had a 0-day vulnerability, meaning there was something wrong with the software. They caught it, but they didn't catch it before the bad guys caught it. And they were able, just with a 24-hour lead time, to exploit all of this data and steal it. So it just to show you that anything that happens to the vendor, right, that's bad, or any vulnerabilities within the vendor become your vulnerabilities, especially if they have a very integrated role with your network. So it's very important to take certain steps to minimize your risk from third parties. So how do we minimize risk or participate in TPRM, third party risk management? The first thing is you have to investigate that entity. And this does not mean you hire a PI and get all weird and, start acting like you work for the damn CIA. No, it's uses a very basic tool called Google, and you Google their name and maybe put "and lawsuit" or "and cyber," and you see if they've ever been sued. You see if they've had a recent breach. These are the things that you want to just look for. Kind of Google around. Don't just read the reviews, because anyone can pop up and have 50 reviews all written by family members about how great they are, right? Google doesn't discriminate and sit there and say, I bet on Facebook that you're their brother-in-law, so you're going to write something nice. Or if you're my family, they probably won't write something nice. But my point is that the Google reviews are not reliable. You need to actually do a news search. The next thing is have them complete a cybersecurity questionnaire, so that if they misrepresent something to you, right, you are not on the hook. So you put in the contract with them something along the effects of, you responded to the questionnaire, your responses to this questionnaire are deemed truthful and accurate. The basis of your responses are material inducement to entering into this contract. This information is incorrect or falsehood. We would have never entered into this contract. And if we determine that you were incorrect or false in your response, we reserve the right to breach and whatever, so that you can get out of that arrangement very carefully. So you want to ask them. And it's really not hard to create these. You can usually find them online. And then you want to ask your attorney to do a search of legal databases. So almost all attorneys have access to legal research platforms that allow you to search by entity name to see if there's ever been any filings, not just filings, but any decisions rendered on a motion or a verdict involving that person, and it'll let us know if they've been really active in any kind of lawsuit. And it's a great way to see if there's been liens, bankruptcy filings for that particular entity, because a bankruptcy filing on behalf of an entity means they are cash poor. And if they're cash poor, they're not investing in cybersecurity. So just something to think about. You also want to set up Google alerts so that they do have an incident, the vendor does. You're not waiting for them to tell you, as soon as it, sort of hits the World Wide Web, right? If they have a patent, they claim we use this patented AI technology. I want to see the patent. Thank you. I want to see it. I want to be able to pull it. I'll take the patent number, please. And I'll give you a great example. I would say 3 weeks ago, the FTC filed an administrative complaint against a company called Workado, WORKADO LLC, which claimed to have an artificial intelligence tool that could determine on a 98.3% success rate the difference between human-generated content and artificial generated content. And it was designed to be used by laboratories and schools to determine basically if people are cheating. Are they cheating when they say they wrote this book or essay or study, right? It's basically, that was what it was supposed to do. Well, the FTC independently tested it and found that it was only 53% effective, which makes it really no more effective than a flip of a coin, right? But they were still marketing themselves as this 98.3% effective with no verification, and people just trusted them. So you're basically paying for a service that would do nothing more for you than flipping a coin. And God only knows how much they paid for this. So just don't believe everything people tell you. This is just, by the way, another reason why I'm always super cautious of anyone trying to sell me an AI tool. Generally, I'm a big waste of time when it comes to that. I'm just like, I'm good. I'll talk to you maybe in 5 to 10 years when I feel like the technology is more solidified. And then once you investigate that third party, then you want to restrict their use. You want to operate under the principle of least privilege. What is the minimum amount of privilege I can give you into my network and still get the job done? Maybe that means hosting them through a remote desktop where they don't have any access to your primary system, but they can still trade information through a secure portal. You do not want to just give them login credentials to your network. So that is generally how you go about that. Now, for your contracts, again, here's Moira with, good information. You always want to have certain provisions in any contract with a third party risk management, with any third party for risk management. First thing is you always want to make sure you spell out how payment terms are going to go and put in provisions there to prevent payment fraud. So if they're requiring that they be paid via ACH or electronic payment, you either want to go through a third party vendor, have wire insurance, or tell them, hey, we will never make changes to the payment instructions at any point in time unless we hand deliver them to you, because it reduces the risk of phishing. And if they do fall for fraud, despite these provisions in the contract, they're not relieved of their duty to pay you. I have multiple lawsuits going right now for other clients because someone paid someone they weren't supposed to. Another one is you want to issue minimum insurance standards that have third-party insurance coverage. So in other words, if they have an issue, right, they have third-party coverage so that they have coverage in the event you get sued that can sort of back you up. I'm a big believer in, some form of basic cybersecurity safeguards that you require from them, right? In other words, they are representing and warranting to you that you don't use any end-of-life software. They have their firewalls configured, several times a year, all updates. They have an update patch management schedule that they religiously follow, and they have information security policy with that particular company. And those are just some of the cybersecurity safeguards I would require. Also, password policies, although I feel like no one follows them, which makes me irate. And you want to make sure if they are at the end of the contract, if they are housing some of your data, that you have time between the termination of the contract and when they destroy the data to request a copy of it. Or if you do want them to destroy it, that they require that you provide, or that they provide you with a certificate of destruction and limits on how they can use that information for future like marketing or studies, even if it's, anonymized. So these are just some of the major things I like to see in any third-party management agreements. All right. Next one is you have to plan for the attack. So even if you do everything right, you've got third-party management agreements in place, you did your research on your vendors, they have no prior cyber incidents, they have a 2 million aggregate cyber insurance policy that includes, third-party coverage, and maybe they even listed you as an additional insured. And their employees are heavily screened, they run background checks, and they have very strict system access controls, so the employees can only do so many bad things on the network without being issued. You still have to plan for attack because someone that you trust will get attacked. I don't know if you've ever read or heard about the SolarWinds fiasco from 2020, but essentially the Department of Defense, Department of Commerce, AT&T, Verizon, poor guys, they always get hit, right? Shell, everybody essentially got infiltrated through SolarWinds because they all use SolarWinds for their IT management software, and SolarWinds got compromised because they had a password that did not comply with their password policy. It was literally password 123, and you can read that and double check me on it. Anyways, it created this massive issue, and the company itself, as well as their chief information security officer, temporarily faced criminal charges, which were subsequently dismissed. So I mean, it was a very big deal. So in other words, the point of that is you have to plan for the cyber attack. It will happen at some point. It doesn't always, it creates some big dramatic system. It doesn't always, cripple your business, but there always will be something. So what do you need? You always want to have a printed copy of your insurance policy, because if your network is completely encrypted, how are you going to look up your policy? How are you going to know who to make a claim to, right? And you don't want to have to figure out who your broker is and rely on some broker to tell you, what's in your policy, and especially if you're your own internal counsel who's going to help you navigate it. The next thing is you need to know who your first call is. I don't recommend it being your insurer. The first call I think anyone should make is going to be to, if you're in the state of Louisiana, to Louisiana State Police Cybercrime Unit. They do an amazing job. I use them for all my clients, and I get my clients, by me using them, they get a completely free digital forensics exam of their network on the memory level, which is not super common, and it's very expensive to pay for. So big fan of that. And that's when you should call your lawyer, right? Because that's the only good thing about lawyers, right? We are the lost baggage claim of life. But the one superpower I do have, and every other lawyer has, is I have attorney-client privilege. So you can tell me everything that went wrong and everything you did bad, and I can't tell anyone. Whereas if you just start making phone calls to board members, especially ones that don't work for the same company as you, that information is gone, it's privileged, it's discoverable, anyone can hear about it. You also want to know your backup schedule and your pay schedule, because if you have a cyber event the day before payday, let me tell you what your first problem is going to be: making sure everybody gets paid, right? Because nothing will piss off employees and have them calling the press and ranting about you on Twitter like them missing a payday. You want to make sure also that you have a basic Q&A for employee communications, so you can say, look, we know you got issues, especially if it's noticeable, and know how you want to handle it. And then you also want to make sure, again, you train those employees in advance what to do when they see these things. Don't turn off the computer or the server, just disconnect to the internet. And then I would switch to all cell data communications. So if they are using a phone, do not be connected to the Wi-Fi. You want to make sure you're, only using cellular data. So these are sort of my go-to things when I tell people to plan for their attack. All right. I do like to include a little technology cheat sheet because, as Henry explained, I do love technology. I had a Macintosh Lisa in my room growing up. I don't know how many of you are that old, but I am. And I remember I played these little games where I had to match dinosaurs. And then, of course, we're in the world of Carmen San Diego. And I've had a computer ever since. And it has been my absolute favorite thing. I could sit around and play with a computer all day. So the first thing you need to know from a technology perspective is always be aware of regulated data, because it's going to have very specific protections that need to be in place, right? So if you are dealing with HIPAA data or financial data, there are actually federal regulations that require a certain standard of care that you will need to follow. And if you can't follow them, even if you can't be sued for failure to follow, those laws, you can be sued for negligence. So don't take any comfort in the fact that, oh, it's a federal regulation, only a government agency can enforce it. No, plaintiffs' attorneys are extremely smart, and they will find a way to sue you, and they already have, and that is just by using basic negligence, and it is working. Next, you never want to overpromise and underdeliver on cybersecurity. So I see all these people that say we're the best guaranteed cybersecurity provider and expertise on the market. I love when they say stupid crap like that, because then I know that if there's a problem, I got them, kind of by the junk, right? Because they've made these public representations out there that they're the best. Don't say that, right? No one is the best. This is a constantly moving marketplace that is constantly innovating. We haven't even seen like the beginning, I think, of the real cyber revolution. AI is becoming old news, and it's all going to be about quantum in the next 5 years. And no one even really understands what that is. My point is, don't overpromise and underdeliver. Just say we employ commercially reasonable cybersecurity tools to try to protect your data, period. But we cannot provide any guarantee. Next one is implement your third-party risk management. You always also want to block certain websites on your network, dating websites, ChatGPT, because nothing is more indicative of a lazy person than being like, oh, I was supposed to summarize these meeting notes on this highly sensitive topic. Let me just dump it all into ChatGPT and let them do it for me. That includes Grammarly. You want to block porn sites, TikTok, and RedNote. So TikTok has been reverse engineered to show that if you download the app, it is collecting data off of your machine. And RedNote is the new, well, it's not new, RedNote's been around, but it's going to be the replacement for TikTok when TikTok eventually gets banned, potentially as early as June 19th next month. Require consent for everything, especially if you were using AI, and minimize the use of biometrics. That is a whole other presentation, but I will say biometrics has, if it is regulated in your state, Texas, Washington, Illinois, I want to say Florida, there's a couple of them. I'm missing, I think, two. They come with statutory minimum penalties per violation. So if you were dealing with any kind of biometrics and there's possibility you collected biometric information from someone who lives in one of those states, especially Illinois, you could be on the hook for a lot of money. Always patch and use these minimum cybersecurity tools, firewall, endpoint detection and response software, also known as antivirus. Have a secondary backup system. Don't just rely on the backup system that you have right now. So like, I'll give you an example. I use Dropbox, and I also use a system called Backblaze, which copies everything on my C drive. So everything on Dropbox gets fed up into the cloud. And then once every week, I have a hard line into a backup system, because chances are it's becoming more evident that bad guys are going after the backups before they attack the main portion of the network, because they know that you probably only have one backup. So I like to keep a static one. And then multi-factor authentication. This does not solve all your problems, but it makes things a hell of a lot harder. I have so many attempts to log in to my Microsoft account every day. I can literally pull it up and look at them. And of course, they're never from in this country, and they all failed because I religiously use MFA on every single thing that I do. And I never save my cookies, which I will show you at the end of this presentation. And no, that has nothing to do with the Girl Scouts. So guaranteed failures, the last thing, you never conduct an assessment, you don't have anyone in charge, and you don't even consider which regulated data field are. That tells me you're going to be a very easy sitting duck to get sued by someone who's pissed because you did them wrong. All right, let's talk about emerging threats with our last few minutes. All right, so the first one is criminals are stealing cookies. So what is a cookie? A cookie is a little piece of information that is stored in your browser that shows that it is really you from this particular IP address trying to log into this account. And it gets saved when you put in your multi-factor authentication. So let's say I go to log in to my healthcare portal, right? At my chart. And it says, okay, log in, I log in. And it says, okay, we texted a code to your phone. Please insert that code. So you insert the code. Well, it says, remember me for 30 days on this device. And you click yes. It's creating a little bit like an information packet that it stores in your browser. So the next time I go to log in tomorrow to check my test results or to cancel or schedule a follow-up appointment, it immediately says, oh, we already authenticated her yesterday. It's good for 30 days. Well, because browsers are so easy to infiltrate and people don't update them, right? Bad guys are stealing cookies. In other words, they're in your browser, they watch that information token get saved, they copy it, and then they store it into their own browser. And so they don't have to go through multi-factor authentication for the next 30 days. And that is how they're getting around multi-factor authentication or bypassing it. So anytime you see that little pocket that says, remember this device for 30 days, I would add this to your information security policy. No, there's no remembering me. I'm sorry. I know it's a big pain in the butt, but at the end of the day, people used to have babies in fields and like everyone was like milking cows and the pyramids were built by hand, right? I think we can all plug in a code. It's really not that big of a lift, right? And it's a good way to stay safe. The next one are new phishing attacks. This actually happened to me. So the way anti-malware scanning software works on an email is the email itself, it gets scanned for some form of indicator of malware. So what bad guys have done is they realize that if they include the malware in a document that is corrupted, like on a very minor level, just minorly corrupted, the email software can't read that document that's attached to the email. And so they can't, find the malware. So the bad guys will do is they'll say, hey, please see the attached for further information. You get an email like this. You go to open the attachment and the bad guys know exactly how corrupted the document has to be or can be for Microsoft to automatically fix it. How many of you guys have received a document that says, authorize us to convert this to the most recent version of Microsoft Word? And you click yes, right? Well, that's all the bad guys have done is they've taken old versions of Word that they know Microsoft Word will auto correct. And so you get a little thing like this and says, we see unreadable content. Is it okay with you if we just go ahead and fix this for you? And you, of course, say yes. And then you get to the bad part. In there, it'll have something that says, to claim your check for this or to see payroll information for the upcoming quarter, scan this QR code. And what all this has done is evaded all of the anti-malware software that is attached to your email address by simply creating a corrupted document. And then because, like I said, it's corrupted and it can't be opened by the email platform, only by Microsoft Word, it doesn't catch it. And there you are. There's nothing standing between you and reading this QR address or clicking on this link that is going to take you to a malicious site. So these are just little ways. So by telling people, if you get a document and you don't know who it's from, I've seen a lot of this through Dropbox and OneDrive. You get a document or a link and you don't know who it's from, don't open it, right? Contact that person who's sending it to you. Or if you don't know that person, you have no idea where it came from, just immediately delete it, right? Don't remember your cookies. These are all little administrative things that you can do to protect your own business and your employees from doing stupid things. Because even though your employees are your best asset, they're also your biggest liability. So the more you can do to educate them and kind of control their ability to do stupid things, or at least kind of, CYA when they do, do stupid things, the better you're going to be. My name is Sarah Anderson. This has been an absolute pleasure. I love talking to people about cybersecurity. So I've got my law firm, SWA Law, here in the beautiful Baton Rouge, Louisiana, me and several other attorneys here at our small little office. And then also I do some corporate training and public speaking through Project Greenlaw, which is, my little side hustle. This is a legitimate QR code at the bottom of the screen. So if you are on LinkedIn, please use it, friend me, say hello, so that, we can share information. And if you're out of state, I have a client that does a lot of work all over the Eastern Seaboard. I'm always looking for good referrals on commercial property matters over there. So it's been an absolute pleasure. And of course, please reach out to me with any questions. And thank you so much.
Sarah, thank you so very much. That was awesome. I hope y'all listened fast. 'Cause,
Sorry.
but it's gonna no, it's absolutely awesome. Great news is it's recorded, and we'll be sharing a link to that to the recording for anybody that wants it. Sarah, if there's like the one thing you mentioned, there were like three things at the end there that are like guaranteed failure. If there was one thing that you had to tell an IT director, business leader, somebody in the C-suite who feels like they're working hard, we're all busy, we're all facing a lot of changes. If there was one thing to do next, what would you lean people towards?
I would absolutely make sure that you at least have endpoint detection and response software. If you're talking about one thing they could do technically with a stock agent, so really high level product is always a good investment, a SentinelOne or a CrowdStrike. And then if you're talking about administratively, I would really, harp on third party risk management because they tend to be a bigger threat than your employees. You can neutralize a lot of employee threats by putting them on a very restricted user profile. Now you can't neutralize all of them, but you make them users as opposed to administrators, which too often nobody does. And then be very careful with who you partner with on a third party perspective, to make sure that, their issues don't become your issues.
And that's beautiful. Thank you so very much. That's pretty powerful. And it's a lot of work, like you mentioned, to work through all your vendors. I don't know about you, but I think we have over 100 vendors at this point here at
Oh, geez.
Turnkey that we work with on a fairly regular basis. So let me kind of wrap up real quick with a couple things. If you want more information, I'll go back a slide. Please make sure and grab Sarah's contact information. She has just been really generous with us to share here, and we are so appreciative of that. But grab that and reach out if you want more information, just kind of day to day on a whole host of things. Check us out at turnkeysol.com/resources. We've got webinars and white papers and tech talks. The webinars that we do, we cover a whole bunch of different things. I'll kind of from cybersecurity to just basic business stuff, how to use a program. You might find something useful there for your team. We've got some really good white papers and simple little 1 or 2 page documents or infographics on how to do some things that you're welcome to share with your company, look at and distribute. And we also publish a monthly newsletter and have for years, the Turnkey Solutions Sentinel, where we cover a lot of really top subjects like what's coming out with the latest version of Teams, all the way to current laws that have changed, password managers and the different tools and all sorts of different things in there. So check that out, and you can subscribe at turnkeysol.com/resources. Last thing that I would throw out there, if you have a question about getting started, one of the things that I can help you with in line with what Sarah has shared with us today is that we always recommend that one of the first spots to start is conducting a risk assessment. We see that the FTC, CIS, National Institute of Standards and Technology, HIPAA, your insurance underwriter, all require regular risk assessments. When's the last time you looked at things from soup to nuts, from beginning to end? In today's world, my suggestion on that is a risk assessment is not the same as a pen test. What we called a pen test 15, 20 years ago was wildly different from a risk assessment today. So doing it well is important. Next month in June, we are having a webinar that we're going to be presenting similar forum and time frame and whatnot, and shared online, but AI for your business. We're going to be walking through some things that work well, some things that don't, some real world examples of like how we see it being used and what's not going well and where it might find a good spot. And I know, Sarah, you said just don't use it, but we have a few people who have kind of pushed the envelope, a few clients and a few environments where that's it's being used whether we like it or not. So check us out there and stay tuned there. And if you want to look at getting a free risk assessment, a basic risk assessment is going to go a lot farther down the road than no risk assessment. Check us out at tcas.la/RA, or scan the QR code there. So with that, that concludes everything that we've got. Sarah, thank you again for
You're very welcome.
For presenting. We really appreciate your time.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing and for your wisdom and experience. And we appreciate y'all, and go have a great day.